cellular senescence. 50 years ago, microbiologist Leonard Hayflick demonstrated that, contrary to what was believed, human cells in a petri dish do not continue to double forever. They only grow and divide about 50 times before entering an irreversible state of arrested replication known as cellular senescence. Senescence comes from the Latin word senex, meaning growing old. We always have immortal stem cells that can create new cells with a fresh start, but once they form, they only have about 50 divisions before they too are dead in the water. This is a good thing. This natural Hayflick limit helps protect the body against cancer by blocking the proliferation of damaged cells. That's great for successfully getting us through reproductive age and passing along our genes, but what happens when the natural human lifespan of about 30 years gets extended to 80 years or more by miracles like sanitation? Our body ends up littered with senescent cells. Zombie cells. Hayflick figured that these non-dividing cells might contribute to aging simply because they had lost their capacity to participate in tissue repair and regeneration. Instead, it turns out, they actively damage surrounding tissues, earning them the moniker zombie cells. The problem with zombies isn't only that they're no longer productive members of society, they also want to eat your brains. When we're younger, senescent cells are cleared by our immune system. When our cells reach their limit and are ready to retire, they're programmed to start releasing a cocktail of inflammatory chemicals called the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, or SASP, S-A-S-P. Inflammation, a process that often carries a negative connotation, can sometimes be a benefit. Just like inflammation caused by a splinter draws immune cells out of circulation to a puncture wound, senescent cells make their own funeral arrangements by releasing inflammatory factors to flag themselves for immune clearance. There's a problem, though. As we age, more and more senescent cells are piling up at the very same time that our immune systems are falling into disarray. So the localized transient inflammation that is usually beneficial, like in a splinter scenario, develops into a detriment, the chronic systemic inflammation that characterizes aging and disease. Even though the senescent cell burden in aged tissues represents just a small fraction of total cells, they can have an outsized impact through SASP secretion, which can disrupt local tissue architecture and spill out into circulation. What is frequently the largest organ in the human body? Is it the liver, the skin? No. In a growing number of people, it's our adipose tissue, that is, body fat. The inflammation related to obesity, which tends to worsen with age, has been tied to the buildup of SASP-producing senescent fat cells. SASP inflammation may even account for some of the most dreaded side effects of chemotherapy. Chemo works by successfully driving cancer cells senescent, but the ensuing SASP storm can drive bone marrow suppression and heart toxicity. With all this SASP inflammation, it's no surprise that senescent cells are connected to a spectrum of age-related diseases, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, herniated discs, spinal curvature, and loss of muscle mass and kidney function. Even cancer, ironically. Although cellular senescence likely evolved as an anti-cancer mechanism, late in life, the excess inflammation can actively feed tumor growth, as in feed quite literally via angiogenesis, the sprouting of new blood cells into the tumor. But how do we know cellular senescence is the cause rather than the consequence of disease? First, a sidebar. Young blood. In c.nf/parabiosis, I detail a macabre set of experiments showing that old animals, surgically conjoined like Siamese twins to young animals, grow healthier, stronger, and smarter, and live significantly longer. To determine if this was due to transmissible blood-borne factors rather than just shared organ capacity, researchers turned to transfusing old animals with young blood. I explore those Vampire 2.0 experiments in c.nf/bloodboy. Yes, the injection of blood from young mice into old improves cognition, for example, suggesting there's some sort of restorative factor in youthful blood, but the injection of blood from old mice into young can make things worse, suggesting there's some sort of debilitating factor in older blood. Or maybe the old blood is just diluting the revitalizing factor in the young mouse. For that matter, maybe the young blood is diluting the debilitating factor in the old mouse. Amazingly, the latter seems closer to what's happening, as the simple dilution of blood in older animals can replicate much of the regeneration found in the parabiotic and transfusion studies. And indeed, patients with moderate Alzheimer's randomized to blood dilution experienced about 60% less cognitive and functional decline over a period of 14 months compared to a sham placebo procedure. The advantage over blood transfusions, as the director of the University of Zurich's Institute of Biomedical Ethics put it, there is something peculiar about the old literally feeding on the young. Out with the old. Researchers proved cause and effect by transplanting senescent cells from older mice into younger ones, and all it took were a few to cause persistent age-related physical dysfunction and a quintupling of their mortality. Conversely, clearing even a fraction of senescent cells can profoundly delay tumor development and age-related organ deterioration. The marked extension of lifespan and healthspan through senescent cell clearance sparked a gold rush to identify senolytics, compounds that can eliminate senescent cells. In my video, c.nf/senolytics, I review both drug and lifestyle approaches. In short, cellular senescence can be thwarted by preventing our DNA from becoming damaged beyond repair in the first place, as I explain in the oxidation chapter. Senescent cells can then be eliminated by exercise and caloric restriction. Details in c.nf/senolytics, as well as a variety of dietary components. Quercetin. In 1936, Albert Szent-Györgyi, who won the Nobel Prize the following year for discovering vitamin C, suggested that a class of phytonutrients called flavanols should also be considered a vitamin. He suggested vitamin P. The most common flavanol in the diet is quercetin, which is found concentrated in onions, kale, and apples. It's what gives apple peels their bitter taste. Researchers have been testing dozens of different compounds on cells scraped from umbilical cords and then irradiated to force senescence. In 2015, they announced their results. Quercetin was a natural senolytic. More details in c.nf/quercetin, which is spelled Quercetin. But, bottom line, quercetin doses as low as the human equivalent of one small apple a week reduce cellular senescence and improve the health span of aging mice. For example, they experienced less hair loss, had enhanced heart function, and gained greater athletic endurance into the equivalent of their 60s. So we may want to share a few kale stems with our pet mouse, but what about people? First, a sidebar: sources of quercetin. Quercetin can also be found in its namesake, oak trees, from the Latin quercus, but it is considered widespread in plant-based foods. In fact, quercetin is so pervasive in the plant kingdom that it can even be found in iceberg lettuce. Lettuce is the fifth leading source of quercetin in the American diet. Onions have between 20 milligrams and 100 milligrams each, apples between 4 milligrams and 20 milligrams, a 1-pound bunch of kale may have 50 milligrams, and a cup of tea about 5 milligrams. Capers have 20 milligrams per tablespoon, but stay away from high-sodium brands. I've seen capers in the market with anything between 0 and 200% of your entire daily sodium limit per serving. Although quercetin supplements procured online tend to be accurately labeled, and there are safety data to suggest no significant adverse effects to taking as much as 1,000 milligrams for as long as 12 weeks, I recommend sticking to dietary sources, as does the Mayo Clinic team who established the field. Apples and onions. It's hard to tease out the effects of quercetin from the range of salutary effects attributed to quercetin-rich foods, such as apples and onions. I note in c.nf/applesonions how the wisdom of an apple a day keeps the doctor away, a public health aphorism dating back to 1866, seems to have borne fruit. It appears to be less the apple of one's eye than the apple of one's arteries. Significantly better improvement in artery function within hours of eating unpeeled apples than after eating apples that have been peeled is consistent with a quercetin effect, and indeed even isolated quercetin supplements can lower blood pressure, cholesterol, and inflammation. Unfortunately, quercetin-rich onion powder failed to improve cognition in elderly with or without Alzheimer's disease. Details in c.nf/onion powder. Although most of the quercetin supplement studies use doses not easily achievable through diet, even just 3/4 of a teaspoon of fresh onion can acutely improve blood pressure and fluidity compared to placebo, helping to explain why those who consume more quercetin appear to have less than half the risk of dying from heart disease. A modeling study even suggested that prescribing an apple a day could prevent about as many deaths from vascular disease on a population scale as prescribing everyone a cholesterol-lowering statin drug, and with fewer side effects. Ironically, now that drugs like Lipitor are available in generic form, the drug would likely be cheaper than the fruit. A sidebar, a new wrinkle. The disappointing interventional cognition data were met in 2018 by a report questioning quercetin's senolytic activity period. The original quercetin studies in people had been performed on cells from the lining of umbilical cord blood vessels, a convenient source of human tissue. When the experiment was repeated with cells from adult donors, though, quercetin didn't seem to have the same senescent cell-killing effect. However, in 2019, quercetin was found to do something even better. Werner syndrome is a rare genetic disease characterized by a mutation of a DNA repair enzyme that results in premature aging. When senescent Werner cells were exposed to the level of quercetin one could get in the bloodstream by eating quercetin-rich foods, they seemed to be rehabilitated rather than eradicated. It appeared as though the senescence was reversed, like waking the living dead. What about aging cells that aren't mutated? A rejuvenating effect on senescent cells was found there as well. In the journal Experimental Gerontology, researchers in Greece claimed to have put quercetin to the test topically on volunteers and reported, quote, positive results as regards to skin elasticity, moisturization, and depth of wrinkles, unquote, but their data do not appear to have been published, which raises concern about the veracity of the claims. Fisetin. Given the senolytic success of a quercetin cocktail, researchers started screening other flavonoids. In doing so, they found one that was nearly twice as potent, fisetin. It can increase the lifespan of yeast by 55% and fruit flies by 23%. Fisetin can also increase the lifespan of mice, even when begun later in life. When started at an age roughly equivalent to 75 years in humans, fisetin extended the average and maximum lifespans of older mice by about 75%. Markers of cellular senescence and SASP were significantly reduced in all analyzed tissues in conjunction with a reduction in age-related pathology. A separate study found that fisetin can also increase long-term memory in mice. What about us? Like quercetin, fisetin has been shown to have anti-inflammatory effects in clinical trials, but what about senolytic effects? When human fatty tissue that had been removed during routine surgery was exposed to fisetin, there was indeed a reduction of senescence and SASP markers. Given that fisetin is naturally found in the diet, has no reported side effects, and is already sold over-the-counter in dietary supplements, researchers immediately started designing studies to put fisetin's anti-aging potential to the test. Currently, there are more than a dozen trials in the works, pitting fisetin against a range of age-related conditions, including osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, frailty, kidney disease, cognitive decline, and even COVID-19 complications. The fact that there is so much clinical interest in a natural product that lacks the financial incentives that traditionally drive so much of biomedical research speaks to its promise. Buried treasure. Though first isolated from a Venetian sumac, fisetin is concentrated in strawberries, the richest known dietary source. This may help explain why strawberries, but not blueberries, despite having even more antioxidants, were able to more effectively rescue rats exposed to radiation. I've run through all the landmark strawberry studies in c.nf/fisetin, which is spelled Fisetin. In short, randomized controlled trials show that strawberries can improve cognition, cholesterol, inflammation, and osteoarthritis, as well as boost beneficial gut bugs, including Christensenlacia, a newly discovered bacterial family found associated with longevity based on studies of centenarians and supercentenarians. In the video, I also explain why fisetin supplements are not recommended. Papali. A third natural senolytic compound has been discovered, piperlongumine, found concentrated in a spice commonly sold in Indian grocery stores known as papali, or piperlongum, also known as pibo in China and long pepper in Europe. I detail what it is and what it can do in c.nf/papali, Pippali. I was convinced enough to add it to my daily spice regimen alongside amla, which I'll talk about more, black cumin, which I've already addressed, and turmeric, which is also coming up. Note that the use of papali during pregnancy and breastfeeding is not recommended. Wrapping up cellular senescence with my food for thought, cellular senescence is considered to be one of the foundational hallmarks of aging. The inflammatory SASP secreted by senescent cells is thought to be a main driver of tissue deterioration and disease. To prevent cellular senescence in the first place, we can avert DNA damage by following the recommendations in my oxidation chapter coming up, and to potentially help clear such cells and their SASP, there are natural senolytic compounds in foods, quercetin, fisetin, and piperlongumine. Although it is not yet clear whether sufficient levels can be reached by eating foods rich in these compounds, such foods are healthful in their own right. To help slow this aging pathway, on a daily basis, consider consuming quercetin-rich foods, beverages, and seasonings, such as onions, apples, kale, tea, and salt-free capers, eating fresh, frozen, or freeze-dried strawberries, and seasoning meals with papali or long pepper.